One of my most favorite philosophical questions I like to ask someone is whether or not they believe that you can choose to believe. I am convinced that you cannot choose to believe something. But I still like to ask people because I love watching them and listening to them work through that question of whether or not you can choose to believe something. This is one of the most calm and peaceful mornings I've ever had on this mountain. Usually there is wind just ripping over this ridge, especially in the winter. I mean, you can tell by how flat and wind-driven the snow is. There's just drifts, little drifts everywhere. But anyways, in regards to this question of whether or not you can choose to believe something, in the Mormon community, the community that I grew up in, there are a lot of people that leave the church, leave the faith, and then they come back. And a lot of times they will say, I just decided to choose to believe. And then that will then get parroted by these more orthodox members and these well-meaning people that don't have the doubts. They look at the people with the doubts and say, why can't you just be like them? Why can't you just choose to believe something? Why can't you just choose to come back, choose to overlook, and choose to believe? And so today I want to make my case as to why I don't believe it's possible to choose to believe something. And I want to do it with two examples. The first example is a religious example, and the second one will be a more secular approach, or a secular example. And so the first one is actually, I want to talk about a parable from the Bible, and it's the parable of the sower. So as a quick overview, the parable of the sower is actually found in all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Nevi, don't do this. Anyways, the parable of the sower is found in all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in the parable, there is a gardener, and the gardener is sowing his seeds by throwing them as he walks down a path. And the seeds land in 4 different places. First place is on the path. The second place is on rocky ground. The third place is among thorns, and the fourth place is on the good soil. On the path, the birds in the parable eat the seeds. The sprouts quickly died in the rocky, shallow soil, and the thorns choked out any growth. It was only on the good soil that the seeds grew up and produced anything. And before I go any further, just in case you didn't know, Jesus is the one telling this parable. And I want to point out at this point in the story that while Jesus does praise the good soil, he never condemns any of the other soils. So each one of the soils represents the hearts and minds of someone receiving the teachings. And if it's not obvious, the seeds are the teachings. And in this case, this parable is kind of a meta-parable. It's a parable about parables. And so Jesus is walking around throwing his parables, his teachings, out to people who have hearts and minds in different conditions, in different soils that have different conditions. As I was thinking through this, like what makes us resistant to truth? What makes us resistant to teachings that can resonate and can become plants and bear good fruit? What makes us resistant to those kinds of teachings that are true? And what I came up with is trauma, fear, and ultimately certainty. I don't think there is anything out there that makes us more resistant, more rocky, and more thorny to these seeds and teachings than certainty. I'm not saying it's the best or the only interpretation of this parable, but I think that is an easy conclusion to draw here, is that in order to be open to new concepts, to new teachings, your soil needs to be tilled, it needs to be soft, it needs to be receptive, and a receptive mind is never certain. So the reason I share that parable is really for one purpose, and that's because I think the point, at least one of the points of this story that this parable was trying to make, and I think it's a true one, is that our heart and mind have to be in certain states. We have to be in a certain state of mind. You have to be the good soil to even be open to potentially looking at new beliefs. You have to be uncertain and curious. You have to be the good soil. And so let's move away from that parable now. And let's say that I came to you and I said that there are people in central Brazil that have learned to fly. Would you believe me? And I am going to assume that you would not believe me. Why wouldn't you believe me? I've been to central Brazil and you haven't, probably. Why is that not enough? So let's say I had a picture of someone flying in Brazil. Would that be enough? What if there were a couple people that also agreed with me, that said that they have also seen that people can fly in central Brazil? Is that enough? What if one of those people was a family member? What if that was your mom or your dad or your brother that agreed with me, that testified that that was true? What if a famous scientist like Neil deGrasse Tyson, what if he agreed with me? What if you saw a video? What if you traveled there and saw it with your own eyes? And what if you finally were able to learn to fly yourself? Like, at what point are you going to believe? And why didn't you just choose to believe earlier? What I'm trying to illustrate is that there are certain parameters, certain prerequisites that need to be met before you can even take the step into consideration of whether or not something else is true, of whether or not to take on a new belief. Data must be presented, information must be given from credible sources, from your own sensory perception. Something has to happen so that you have enough data that you can be convinced that that belief is worth holding. And so that's what I'm trying to say, that by using this parable, what I was trying to say is that, like, there are lots of different states of mind and a state of heart where you have a closed heart and a closed mind that won't even allow you to begin to look at new evidence or new information. And then on top of that, you unconsciously or even consciously have these prerequisites, these requirements, before you will believe something. And so my argument around whether or not belief is a choice is that it is not a choice, that you must be convinced by data. That it is a process of conviction. It is a process where you need to be convinced of the belief. What I'm trying to say is that, including all of our external influences and our cognitive biases that we all hold, there are so many things that go into influencing whether or not we believe something. And I don't think that someone can choose to believe something without being convinced first. It might feel like a choice, but at the end of the day, there was enough data that you felt confident enough for you to say, I believe that. Sure, there are, like, confirmation bias can play a huge role in that, because the confirmation bias can essentially force you to overlook more compelling data. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that beliefs that you hold may not be out of choice. It's probably more because of your life experience and circumstance. I think. I could be wrong. There are, like, I'm not an expert in this, not even close. And so if this is even remotely interesting to you, and I've even convinced you to maybe wonder about this, I would highly recommend going and looking for someone that is more well versed and has more expertise than I do on this topic because I think it's fascinating. And I've been procrastinating doing this video for so long because it's such a massive topic. I do these videos and I find these topics so fascinating, but I know I'm not doing them justice. I'm not doing these topics justice because I'm not an expert, but I want to be an expert and I want to share these topics with people. So, and really quick, before I wrap this up, I can already hear people saying, well, that's faith. Faith is a choice to believe. And I would disagree with that in the sense that I think that faith is a belief despite the lack of evidence. It's not belief despite evidence. So I don't think that faith is a choice to believe. I think that faith can be a logical leap, but it's not an illogical leap. You're not contradicting the evidence that you have or the logic that you have. Faith is taking logic to its furthest point and then stepping beyond that, not against evidence or against logic. It's not illogical. Faith should not be illogical. Faith is a step into the unknown. It's not a step against the known, against the data, against the evidence that's out there. And that's just my thoughts on faith. But anyways, if this was interesting or helpful or thought-provoking, share it with someone that you'd like to have a conversation with, because I want these videos to be conversation starters. So anyways, I'll catch you in the next video.